Well, when it comes to infra, there is always news flow, but more so right now when you look at different facets, be it railways, be it highways, and a clutch of other things more. So good time, as always, of course, but good time as we draw towards the close of 2019 to get in the opinion of Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee of Feedback Infra on a clutch of these issues, and how has, maybe as a finale to this conversation, how has he seen 2019 in terms of some key movements on the way ahead that we may have done in this very crucial sector. Mr. Chatterjee, good having you. Thanks much for taking the time out. At the onset, really, we thought of trying to get you to talk about this move by the railways. And there's a two-part question. Part one of my question is how Indian Railways is trying to reorganize the board, and how there's only one cadre instead of multiple others. How do you read into this development? What can it do? Because a lot of people believe that, okay, it is positive, but don't quite know how. What is your assessment of this move?
Well, my assessment is that both the moves are very positive. Move one, which is a restructuring of the railway board, and move two, which is the unification of cadres. So going back to the board, I think both and the reunification, both these recommendations have been made by multiple committees. You know, railways have had a series of very good committees looking into their operations, starting with Rakesh Mohan committee in 2003. Then, there was a committee on safety. Then there was a committee by Vivek Debroy and Sam Pitroda on modernization. All of them broadly have asked for a reorganization of the board and the reunification of the cadre. Now the board has become, it was a fairly bloated board without clear functional responsibilities. That has been provided now, and more importantly, it has got independent directors from different fields who are getting on board the railway board. So I think that's very good to make the board a far more fighting fit, shall we say, institution. And there's always been widespread criticism about silos in the railways. You know, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, traffic, safety, etc., etc. The observers from the outside have always critiqued the railways to say that it is very siloed in its view of how it should perform, and therefore you don't get optimum results, with each silo maximizing, shall we say, its own perspective resident therein. So to break down the silos and to create a unified railway management cadre is indeed a welcome step. But let me stop here.
Okay. Okay, so that's a welcome step. Hopefully it'll make decision making faster if nothing else, but I'm sure there is a lot more to it. But just a follow-up that I have again to the railways piece, Mr. Chatterjee, is news flow that is coming today, and invariably it comes in before every budget, that maybe there is some bit of rationalization of fares, and maybe there is some move towards an economics model-led fares on the freight and on the passenger side. Now, it's a difficult act to enact in that sense. Do you think the railways would do some tinkering on fares this time around?
Look, railway fares have had a basis of economics. However, my expectation is that they won't tinker with freight rates much, largely because it is under severe competition from the road sector. And also because of the general economic slowdown, freight earnings have gone far below the expectations. So for a combination of the reasons, and freight is the real bread earner for railways, I don't think there'll be any great increase in freight. However, I think that there will be some increase in passenger fares, because there are large portions of passenger fares which are, in a sense, could be raised to raise revenue, and also I don't think there would be that intense competition between the passenger fares and roadways or alternative modes of transport, which includes low-cost airfares today. So looking at that side, I would expect a certain increase in the passenger fares, and I think the impact might actually be higher in suburban, where the element of subsidy is higher than long distance.
Yeah, but actually I was wondering, Mr. Chatterjee, if you believe that there would be, and there should be, if you believe there should be some bit of lowering down of the freight rates in order to make rail fare more competitive. Multiple articles come in and talk about how they would need to compete and maybe draw in some goods movement away from the road space into railways. Do you think that can happen? Do you think that should happen?
You know, lowering of freight rates in a situation where there is no great upswing in traffic, freight traffic, is going to put severe stress on the railway fiscal. Because if you had freight rates, if you had freight movement growing normally, say even a few years back, if you had, in step with the GDP, if you had a 7% GDP growth and 5% inflation, I mean, with a 14%, 13% nominal growth of GDP, there would be a certain upward buoyancy to freight. And in that situation, a slight reduction of the freight rates to compete with road would be all right. But here you have a situation of declining tonnage. And whether you should actually, on a declining tonnage, reduce freight rates more will have a severe impact on the railway finances. So on a net basis, I mean, I'm sure the railway minister knows best what to do, but my limited view on the subject would be that it would probably not be wise to lower freight rates to compete with road. A better strategy would be to provide far better service to customers to compete with road, like door-to-door service or RoRo, various other kinds of stuff to enable customers to prefer rail over road for value-enhanced services rather than just, a few points cheaper on the rate card.
What could the railways do over the next 12 months with a leaner board and faster decision making? Are there things that you expect can come in?
Well, the railways have already announced a slew of new initiatives, whether it is station redevelopment, whether it is 150 new trains that are to be run along private lines, privatized 150 trains, the move to very rapid electrification, the introduction of high-speed trains in different corridors. These are announcements which are already well in the public domain, including the electrification on fast track, which is going pretty well. So, I mean, other than implementing and moving ahead on these announced programs with speedy decision-making and implementation, I am not expecting any great further announcements from the railways.
Okay, I just want to move the conversation now out of railways into roads as well. And just a couple of questions that I want your thoughts on. As you look back at 2019, I think what stood out for me is the confusion in the conversation around NHAI's health and how much can they do, how indebted they are, whether they will continue the projects in the same vein or at a slower clip or a faster clip. As you look back, because you would have a better handle on this, how do you think the year ahead would come up in terms of road execution and road awarding?
Okay, so I'll mix up both the fiscal years and the calendar years with your permission.
Okay, sure,
so
please.
If you see the period before the general elections, before the code of conduct came in, where you couldn't announce new projects, the government went overboard and announced a slew of very high investment EPC contracts. So that was the period, January, February, March, around the time the code of conduct kicked in. So you had those 3 or 4 months before that with a high rate of award of EPC contracts, including stretches for Delhi, Mumbai, and various other stretches. What happened thereafter is that the code of conduct came in, and then was the process of general elections and the settling down of the new ministries. So that period saw a dip. Immediately after that, when the new government and Mr. Gadkari took charge of the roads ministry again, there were a large number of questions which were raised, rightfully so, about the future strategic direction of national highways in terms of what kind of roads it should be building and funding, how much of the state highways it should take over, what should it be its rightful level of indebtedness, what is its ability and its liquidity base to service a new clutch of projects. All these questions were asked, and from what I have now understood from the system is that all these issues are behind us now. And effectively these questions have been answered, new directions have been charted out, and NHAI is ready with its new chairman in place also, Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Gadkari. The fog has lifted, and therefore we are looking now at a period where renewed action in NHAI is once again, and when I say NHAI, I mean the total clutch of governmental, central government systems, which is NHDCIL, as well as the ministry's own projects. So we are actually seeing a renewed burst of energy kicking in, and for somebody like me who runs an engineering business which has huge linkages to the roads program, we are already seeing the kind of action that NHAI and the ministry has initiated. So the uptick has started. It will be a few months before you see action on the ground in terms of kilometer of road constructed and awards, etc. But the background work and the thinking is backed with a certain degree of renewed optimism. And this also looks, and when I look back, I can now see NHAI. I've been tracking NHAI since 1997 when it was first started. And it goes through certain cycles. It's not a curve that is just uniformly linear, but it is made up of up cycles and down cycles. And normally these up and down cycles are about, in a stretch anywhere from 6 months to 9 months. So we have actually coasted through a certain down cycle, pre-election, post-election, and we are on the verge of the next up cycle. That's my take since you asked the question.
Yeah, cross fingers. Okay, last couple of questions. I think what happened in the southern states due to the government change is now being feared for the state of Maharashtra as well. There were a couple of stray articles which mentioned, but companies that we spoke to said that they have not heard anything to that effect. What's your sense of the worries that are in the minds of certain people, maybe unfounded, but I want your take out there, the worries that are in the minds of certain people with regards to infrastructure projects in Maharashtra because of the change of government?
No, I wouldn't be that worried. I mean, a little bit of independent snooping around that I've done myself leads me to believe that the government is basically taking stock of the state fiscals. The large projects, coastal roads, Mumbai-Nagpur, metro, etc., also involve very large expenditures from the state budgetary system. So any government that comes to power, in fact, it is actually a positive that they would like to take a pause, reassess the commitments made on mega projects, look at the level of comfort and confidence in an ability to fund them, and then hopefully carry on with them. So the government of Maharashtra nowhere has said that they're cancelling the projects. They have said that they are pausing to take stock of both the pace of implementation of these projects going forward and the fiscal health of the state system to be able to have enough liquidity to see that they are moving ahead in the right manner. And I think every government has the right to do that. It has nowhere said that they're cancelling the contracts, unlike Andhra, where actually they went ahead and cancelled contracts of Amravati and some renewable projects, etc., which is completely unfounded. I do not think Maharashtra government has done that. It has paused to take stock.
Okay, which is good to know coming from you as well. One last question, and something that happened in the last week of November, but we haven't spoken, so I just thought I'll get your view there. The striking down of the Section 87 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. What are your thoughts out here? On most counts, it's a reprieve for or a relief for a lot of arbitration protecting companies that would have undergone the same, I reckon.
See, I think the larger picture is the cabinet decision to release the 75%, is a clear instruction from the cabinet to release the 75% against arbitration awards won by the private sector. What you're talking about is striking down of a particular section which barred projects after 2015 or something of the sort, which provided relief.
Yes.
But the larger picture is that the cabinet has conveyed a clear decision that central government entities, departments, companies, entities that have lost arbitration awards to the private sector are now required to release it against a bank guarantee for the principal amount and not for any foreseeable interest. More importantly, and I think this is equally important, it has debarred heads of institutions from mechanically referring arbitration cases that they have lost to the private sector immediately into the court system. They can only do so now after a clear opinion advocating that route from either the Additional Solicitor General or the Advocate General of India. So this business of every arbitration case that you have lost against the private sector, you just kick the can down to the court system, is also stopped. So the combination of this has raised great hopes in the private sector that not only will past liquidity be released, and that even for an institution like NHAI, that figure is about 20,000 crores. 20-25% of the 80,000 crores under arbitration. And when you add other central government institutions, well, it's anybody's guess what that figure could be. Maybe 30,000 crores, who knows? Now that amount of liquidity coming in soon has raised hopes in the private sector. More importantly, in fact, the reason for more hope is the fact that going forward, no institution can just immediately transfer a lost arbitration to the court system and sit back for the next 20 years. You cannot do this without taking the opinion of the Solicitor General and the additional, the Attorney General. These are very important steps. So let's hope that leads to the release of large dollops of liquidity in the month to come, January, February.
And God knows we need that as well. But Mr. Chatterjee, it was a pleasure getting your thoughts on a variety of those issues. Thanks so much for taking the time out and speaking to us, and wish you a great 2020.
Thank you very much, and Happy New Year to you and your viewers.
Thank you so much. Viewers, thanks for tuning in.